What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, be chatting with Andy Kamenetzsky from Locked On Lakers because, hey, can the Lakers front office, can Rob Pelinka and the rest of the Lakers front office salvage the Russell Westbrook situation and give LeBron James and Anthony Davis another chance to contend for a title together in LA? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every single league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. They've got everything you could possibly need over at BetOnline. Right now, you can take a look at the odds-on favorites for the 2023 NBA title. Right now, the Boston Celtics and Milwaukee Bucks tied at plus 600 for first place. Golden State Warriors at plus 700. Right there next to them, the LA Clippers also at plus 700. And then rounding out the top five for title favorites, you got the Phoenix Suns at plus 900. So for all of that and more, head to their website to learn more about the trends in action available to you. Bet Online. It's where the game starts. Joining us now is Andy Kamenetzsky from Locked On Lakers. You can follow on Twitter at Cam Brothers. Now, Andy, the latest reporting concerning the Los Angeles Lakers, it looks like, as per ESPN's Dave McMenamin, reporting that the Lakers are unlikely to make a move for either one of Eric Gordon or Buddy Hield until they are absolutely certain that a Kyrie Irving trade won't happen with the Brooklyn Nets. So that's where I want to start first. I want to talk a little bit about those two names I just mentioned in a moment, but let's start with just the framework for what even a Kyrie Irving trade would look like in regards to the LA Lakers. How does a Westbrook-Irving swap look in your mind?
Well, it would definitely require one of the Lakers' two picks that they have full control over, 2027 or 2029. I think the sticking point, and I want to say sticking point, I think is actually something of a relative term, because right now, I don't think the Nets would move Kyrie, even if the Lakers were willing to include both of those picks right now. Like I'm pretty of the belief, and this was something that I talked about with Adam Armbrecht earlier in the week on Locked On Lakers, from Locked On Nets, until there is clarity from Brooklyn with what Kevin Durant wants, how much of what he wants really directly is centered around Kyrie Irving being there or not being there, or I guess a deal for Kyrie from the Lakers that is so good that the Nets just say it would be irresponsible of us as an organization to pass up this deal independent of whatever's going on with Kevin Durant. I don't think that they're going to move Kyrie really under any circumstances. So in that sense, I think it could require the Lakers to include both of those picks, which by multiple accounts, they are unwilling to do. But I also don't think it actually wouldn't matter right now, even if they were willing to do it.
It does very much feel like Kevin Durant is the one domino for this offseason that has yet to budge or move, and he's the one guy kind of holding up any potential subsequent moves, with so many organizations potentially maybe being in play for KD, and they don't want to make any other moves like at the margins until they can figure out where that domino is ultimately going to fall. The Lakers finding themselves very much in that mix, unfortunately, not necessarily for KD, but just waiting to see how that situation ultimately pans out. But when you look at where the Lakers find themselves, Andy, I mean, how much confidence and faith do you have in Rob Pelinka, in the Lakers front office, to salvage this situation, even if it's not for Kyrie Irving, to have the limited assets to play with, right? The 2027, the 2029 first rounders. And then also you've got kind of maybe a bit of a disconnect, some pushback there. Jeannie Buss basically saying that she doesn't want to move those picks unless it feels like they can outright win a title with those moves being made using those picks. So is there maybe a disconnect going on there?
Well, I mean, I think the Lakers are in a legitimately difficult spot. And, I think the jury is still out on Rob Pelinka as a guy running basketball ops, even though he does have a title to his name. His overall track record, I think, has been up and down in terms of moves that have been made. That being said, they're in a legitimately difficult place. Granted, they are in a legitimately difficult place in part because of decisions that they made, and they have themselves to blame for that. But that notwithstanding, they do not have a lot of assets that they can move. There's not a lot of resources in terms of trying to create a deal. And on top of it, you have the questions of LeBron and AD's health, because the last 2 seasons and 3 of the 4 that LeBron has been with the Lakers, there have been injury concerns. And, those guys have missed time. And in all honesty, for all the focus on whether or not Russell Westbrook is going to be on this team next season and who can they get in trying to trade Russell Westbrook and how many picks they include, and is Talen Horton-Tucker going to actually make the type of steps that they've needed from him? Will Kendrick Nunn represent a living, breathing player for the team next season? All of this is secondary to, are LeBron and AD going to be healthy and available for the majority of games this season? And if the answer to that is no, none of this other stuff really matters. And the Lakers are in a place where I would think, rightly, they cannot feel 100% confident about that. So that complicates the context for every decision they're going to make.
And while it does complicate those decisions, I think even if you've got LeBron and AD, health concerns aside, which is tough to set those aside, right? I feel like you still kind of owe it to yourself and to them to try and put the best roster around them capable. That way, if they do have a pair of healthy seasons, right, they're there for a majority of the games, it skews on the positive side of what that outcome may look like next season for the Lakers. You put the best possible pieces around them to give yourself a chance to win that chip. But I wonder if, all right, so much of this, it feels like caught up in the idea of you've got to knock the Russ situation out of the park, right? Hit a home run on the Russ thing, right? Package him, maybe a pick or two, and you get back a guy like a Kyrie Irving. Would the Lakers maybe not be in a better situation to swing to a baseball terminology here, right? Hitting a couple singles or a few singles rather than going for that one home run play with Russ? Because it feels like he's going to the final year of his deal. He's effectively an expiring contract. Could that maybe not be, I know Russ is viewed as a negative asset right now, but maybe there's a team out there. Maybe there's a team out there, right, who could, maybe just use him as a salary dump, right? And then you don't have to use one of those first to unload him. Is that a possibility that you see maybe playing out?
I mean, never say never. Creative trades come out of nowhere that surprise everybody. That happens all the time. And surprise deals happen, just period, whether creative or not. So, the league is always unpredictable, and that's great for people like you and me. But if you look at this, I think with grounded realism, Russ is not going to be appealing for the overwhelming majority of teams. Forget just as a salary dump, the overwhelming majority of scenarios that we've seen involving Russ in one way or another include a buyout. There has not been a team that has been linked to Russ where you have any thoughts about him actually playing for that team. It's really just about getting off their own salary, getting, a pick or two, or, a young player like a THT for their troubles, and then buying out Russ, or just telling him to stay home and eventually flipping him again as an even more expiring deal, maybe closer to the deadline or whatever. But Russ as a player right now is 100% considered a negative asset. I don't think Russ is washed as a player necessarily, but his athleticism is declining, and he is maybe the least blendable player in the entire league. Russ is not a guy that you just bring in and look to mesh with whatever you're doing. He is a very, very specific player that kind of needs everything built around him, and there are not a lot of teams that are capable of doing that, or frankly even should be doing that. So as far as the singles question that you brought up, I think it depends a lot on who the singles are and what it takes to get them, because the singles in a lot of ways, I think, can more greatly impact a team that is one step away. You know what I mean? They're one player away from making something happen. The Lakers right now don't seem like a team that's one step away. Granted, that's all viewed through the prism of last year, where everything that could possibly go wrong for them last season did. But the truth is, right now, their roster, the moves that they made this offseason, I think some of them are good in their own right. And, they're a more athletic team. They're a younger team. They definitely have an upgrade at the center position this year with Thomas Bryant and Damian Jones from DeAndre Jordan and Dwight Howard. I mean, there's no question about that. but they still don't seem like a team that is a proverbial piece away. If that piece is Kyrie, that definitely raises the ceiling. But they have so many issues right now with shooting, with defense, that you do have to start weighing the idea of, okay, if you bring in, say, Buddy Hield, is that making you competitive, like in terms of being a contender, or is it making you faux competitive, like you're cosplaying competitive? You know what I mean? Like, because the Lakers really have to think about this, Jackson, because they have so few assets to play with right now. Like they have to treat every single trade that they make and whatever they include, you know, they can only trade them once. So they have to really think about these things very carefully because they're not a team that has a lot of resources to play with.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of those names right there that we had right there at the top. Some rumors being linked to Eric Gordon in Houston, Buddy Hield in Indiana. If the Lakers were to go one of those two options, at the end of whatever this potential Kyrie Irving saga is, maybe Kyrie, eventually is just off the table completely. Which of those two pieces, in your eyes, makes more sense for this Lakers team, would be more appealing to you to try and bring it, depending on the value that it would take to acquire said player?
I mean, a lot of this depends on the value. It's really interesting because Buddy Hield is more of a wing, at least physically, and the Lakers need much more wing help. They've got a glut of guards and a glut of guys who are basically Eric Gordon's size. So in a lot of ways, Buddy Hield fits physically more of what they need. That being said, though, Buddy Hield's not a good defender. Eric Gordon is. Buddy Hield has the last few seasons been a good shooter. He has not been a great shooter from outside. His 3-point percentages have dropped over the last couple seasons. As if you're going by what we've seen over the last couple seasons, I don't know how much of a better of an outside shooter he actually is than Eric Gordon. So it's a weird thing because Hield fits a lot more of what they need on paper. And if nothing else, represents a larger body that you could maybe switch with defensively or whatever, but he's not a good defender. And, Eric Gordon can, I think, do more things than Buddy Hield can do. But positionally, they don't have as much of a need for Gordon as they do for Hield unless they move out a couple of their guards. So it really just speaks to how many questions the Lakers have and, kind of the roster mess that they're dealing with.
How will the Lakers be able to resolve the situation that they find themselves in? Will Russell Westbrook be a Laker for much longer throughout this offseason? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Lakers. Andy, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Anytime, man.